Howdy folks, I thought I would do a series of videos on the channel about the different factions, just roughly explaining them in the run up to the Kickstarter, because people are now going to be like putting their money down and you might want to be figuring out exactly which of the factions interest you the most. I also do a lot of stuff like in-universe, like the lore stuff and the short stories. They're all told from an in-universe point of view. And this kind of just gives me a chance to just kind of have a little more fun with French Crusade, because it can't all be serious all the time. I'll get very bored of the videos that way. So let's talk about Trench Pilgrims today. So really the questions you have to ask yourself if you like Trench Pilgrims or are interested in Trench Pilgrims is, do you like skin and do you like blood? And do you not have a huge preference for where the skin and the blood actually is? If that's the case, then Trench Pilgrims might just be for you. Trench Pilgrims are the Walmart car park screamers of Trench Crusade. They are the bus stop evangelicals of Trench Crusade. They are the people who stand in the middle of the road with a sign that says the end is nigh of Trench Crusade. And to be fair, that's only because the end is actually fucking nigh in Trench Crusade. They're not wrong. They're just crazy. They are assailed constantly with like visions of demonic armies rolling across the earth and the end times, and this activates them in a way and causes them to want to become warriors for Christ. So they roll off to no man's land or wherever the fighting is fiercest and they get stuck in, because that's what they do and that's what makes them terrifying. These are just normal everyday people who see visions and go, wow, what I just saw was like terrifying and the scariest shit ever. I'm gonna go stick a fucking knife in it. So it's hard to connect with them on a level of logic, but it's easy to connect with them on a level of badassery. They really are quite cool. I consider them to be within the lore. I think they're the craziest shit in the game, because they're just normal, everyday, run of the mill people who see a vision and go, YOLO, I'm gonna go fight a demon. So, yeah, I think they're really dope that way. Now, within the world of Trench Crusade, they don't actually have official backing from the church or an official connection to the church, but they can get their hands on really important shit like the Communicants for the Metachrists in order to make their Communicants. So there's definitely something going on here. There might not be an official true line from the church, but it's pretty clear if you think about it in universe. There is some kind of shenanigans going on between the Trench Pilgrims and the church. They might not be an official sanctioned part of the army. The church might stand there and go, oh no, don't do that. You're crazy. That's not what God wants you to do. God doesn't want you to, like, skin yourself in a shrine anchorite. We'll get to that later. But then when war happens, when it boils down to it, they just need bodies in the trenches. So, why fuck up a good thing? Trench pilgrims want to fight. The church needs warriors. Let it roll. So yeah, that's really the lore. They're the vagabond, the broadest flavors for the good guys would appear in the Trench Pilgrims, because they can be from all over the world, right? It doesn't matter. As long as you can make your way to no man's land, as long as you can conceivably get to the Levant or to Europe, you can fight. So they're very interesting that way. You could have very broad scope for who you wanted in your warbands. You could have really fun character development and character histories and things like that. So huge room for doing kind of whatever it is that you feel like doing. Alrighty, let's have a look at some interesting weaponry, because this will tell you a lot about the Trench Pilgrims. They have this thing called a war cross, which is pretty much what you potentially imagine it to be. It's a cross that you throw at people. And because it's a cross, it's got 4 bits, and all those bits are pointy and spiky. So you just YOLO it at people up to 8 inches away. It's got no kind of penalty for long range. It has the assault keyword, which means you can chuck it on a charge. And yeah, it's really, really interesting. So imagine it as being kind of like a replacement grenade. in a way. A trench pilgrim version of a grenade. They've also got this thing called a punt gun, which is just a huge shotgun. It gets +1 to hit and injure. It's got the heavy keyword and the shrapnel keyword. It's like two-handed and it's got a range of 18, and that stuff is like pretty crazy. Punt guns. And then anti-tank hammers, where you boosh people essentially with a two-handed mallet that's made from a tank shell that explodes. And when it goes off, you suffer a blood marker, and we'll talk about why that's actually very beneficial to some trench pilgrim units in a moment. So we'll duck into the actual units themselves, and up first we have the War Prophet. War Prophets they're very strong units on the table. They have a +2 dice to ranged and melee, and they can take all the kind of armor that you would want them to take. They can be like very tough to deal with. They can be very, very good in combat. It can be a big concern if you're fighting them. You will instantly distract probably the toughest melee fighter on the other side, and that can be extremely beneficial. So they come with these things called loudspeakers, where they can take a risky action with +2 dice during each activation, and if it's successful, all friendly models within 8 inches of the Prophet can immediately move up to 3 inches closer to the enemy. That matters. Like, the trench pilgrims are about getting across the table as quickly as possible. They have lots of units that are just that little bit faster or capable of moving that little bit faster. And you can strip a turn of ranged engagement from the enemy if they don't know kind of what they're doing, or if they're not watching and being careful and being calculated. And very suddenly you can be up in their business. So they're very interesting and good that way. They also have Memento Mori, which allows them to ignore being taken out of action for the first time. So they think they've got that. No, they don't have that on top of tough. And they've got Laying On Hands, which is an action that they can use to remove blood markers from friendly units. So if you don't know what blood markers are, they're a build-up of damage and injury over time, and you can spend them to scuff your opponent's rolls. So if I've got 2 blood markers on you, I can use one of those blood markers to mess up your defensive rolls, or to improve my odds of hurting you, or even hitting you, and things like that. So very, very useful to be able to strip them away. And they can take away D3 blood markers every turn from a friendly model within 6 inches. So they don't even have to be like within base contact, which is really dope. Up next, we've got the Castigator. The Castigator is like the opposite, essentially, of the War Prophet thematically. The War Prophet is all about amping you up, getting you in touch with your heavenly feelings for God, and reminding you that you do in fact love the militant Christ the Lion. The Castigator is more of a, you're not good enough, you should fear the militant Christ the Lion, and also I'm going to whip the shit out of you, which they legitimately do. So they are quite scary. They achieve a similar function via a different means. They're not as terrifying in combat. They're +1/+1 ranged melee. So they don't quite have the presence of the War Prophet, but they're still very good, and they are quite scary. They've got this thing called Enforced Orthodoxy, which allows them to take a risky action with +1 dice, and they can get friendly models that are down within 8 inches up. So if something is downed, the Castigator can get it up, and then if the War Prophet's nearby, the War Prophet can move it on a little bit extra. Like, they're a very difficult faction to slow down. They really do. It comes across very well. I've always thought this, that of all the factions, I feel like the Trench Pilgrims are the one that plays the way it feels like they should play on the board. They should be filled with a righteous and religious fervor. They should be very difficult to stop. They should be very eager to get to you and inflict a bit of the old religious smitery upon you. And they can take the strong keyword if you want for just +5 ducats. And that's pretty cool, because if you really wanted to, you could give a Castigator a punt gun. I don't really know why you'd want to, other than the fact that it would be cool as fucking shit. But hey, it is what it is. They've also got this thing called Whip of God, where they can actually attack friendly units without the need to charge. And you can take a friendly unit out of action. You get a die into a dice pool, and that dice pool is then used to help you overcome your morale checks. So it's really about deciding, do you think something's going to go out of action? If it is, do you want to be the person who does that in order to take that dice? Because you're going to get moved towards a morale check anyway. So yeah, just a really interesting and fun challenge. So Communicants. Communicants are really interesting because they're lunatics who nail crosses to their face through their eye holes. And I could think of several other areas that I would like to do that to, such as like a wall or a tree or a door, before I ever arrived at nailing something to my face. Anyway, they have a -3 dice on ranged and a +2 dice on melee. So this is telling you these guys are a melee unit. If they're not a melee unit, you need to do something like equip them with a flamethrower, I guess. And that will kind of nullify the old -3 that they have to deal with. They have strong, so they can, take something like a flamethrower or a heavy weapon or something without major issue. They have tough, so they're very hard to get rid of. They have this thing called Miracle of Regeneration, which means that they remove 1 blood marker from themselves if they have any at the start of every turn. Very annoying, because blood markers are what you want to get rid of people. And they have Bodyguard. So if any model with the Pilgrim keyword is within 1% of the communicant, or is within 1 inch of the communicant is hit, they can choose to redirect it to the communicant instead. So they can just absorb damage that would go somewhere else, which is very frustrating and quite annoying. Oh yeah, and the cross nailed to their face counts as both Iron Capriote, combat helmet, and a gas mask, which is just fucking frustrating. So yeah, they're really, really good. They're a lot of fun. And they look cool as shit as well, the models. Alright, Trench Pilgrims. These are like, they're not the scuff units of the warband by any means, but they're the backbone of it in a way. If you want to build them around Trench Pilgrims, you can, to a degree. We'll talk more about that in a second. So these guys are interesting because they're +0/+0 ranged and melee. They have 6-inch movement, but if you kind of attach them to your War Prophet, that could be up to 9, which is pretty good. And it's actually very good. What makes them super interesting is that you can, if you want to, give them the strong keyword for +5. And that's incredibly useful, because normally you would need to invest a lot more in a base unit to get heavy weapons onto the field and not suffer for them. So this is where that punk gun would come in, right? Because if you put it on a unit that's not strong, it can't kind of move and shoot at the same time. You want it to be on something strong. But your strong units in this particular army are probably better, served doing other things than carrying a punk gun. So this is where that would happen. And what makes them really, really interesting is when they die, you can, fess up 45 gold ducats to turn them into a martyr penitent. And that means they take -1 dice when they're injured, rolling on the injury chart, and they get +1 dice to their melee. So it's kind of like a improved version of their own stat line for an extra 15 ducats when they die, if that's something that you want to do. And generally speaking, it is actually something that you want to do. You want to generate high probability rolls, not just a lot of low probability rolls. That's what I've definitely found in this particular rule set, especially at the start of a campaign. Don't go for like 12 models. Don't try and like max count this thing. Just go for dice rolls that actually have a good chance of doing something, not a bunch of dice rolls that have fuck all chance of doing anything, because there's no benefit there. The reason why there's no benefit there is it's so easy to mess with that further with blood markers. Like, I can get a blood marker on something and I can make it almost impossible for you to succeed if you haven't, like, you know, hedged things in your favor mathematically. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Ecclesiastic Prisoners. These guys are 20 ducats. These are the scuff units, but what makes them very interesting is you can spend 35 ducats to put what's called a martyrdom device on them, which is exactly what it sounds like. So they explode, and you want to get across the table as quick as you can, which is doable with them because they have this thing called Mad Dash. They have a 6-inch movement range and a +1 dice to their dash action. So they're likely to hit that dash action more often than not, is what I will say on a statistical variance. So that's actually pretty good. And if they're taken out of action by the martyrdom device, they don't count towards your morale checks, which is great as well. So they can be an interesting pressure play to have one down somewhere and just have it sneaking along and going from like cover to cover, trying to keep it behind terrain, trying to get it somewhere reasonably devastating, locking things down and having it wandering up from behind them. Just it's something for people to worry about. It's a low cost unit that people do actually need to worry about. And a lot of Trench Crusade boils down to just fucking with something for one turn. If you can like interrupt what somebody wants to do for one turn at the right moment, that can be seriously impactful. And this can actually really do that. Now, speaking of fucking with stuff, Stigmatic Nuns. I think Stigmatic Nuns are the legitimate backbone of the Trench Pilgrims, and they're really scary. They've got 8-inch movement. They've got +1 dice to their dash actions or any jump, climb, or diving charge action, which is really annoying because it makes them very effective. They can remove 1 blood marker per turn and convert it into a blessing marker. And if blood markers make stuff harder to do, blessing markers make stuff easier to do. So you have to be churning damage into these things to get rid of them, or else you're just making them kick your ass harder when they do actually get to you. And they're going to get to you quicker than you think because of that 8 inches in movement. They're +1/+1 ranged melee, and they're just a nightmare to deal with because you put a war cross on them, you put a anti-tank hammer on them, and they're generating their own blood markers by whomping you and turning those into blessing markers. And then they're likely using the blessing markers to interrupt your ability to get rid of them. Super annoying, very frustrating unit to play into. If you are Trench Pilgrims, they're dope as shit. So consider giving them a shot. Alrighty, and the Shrine Anchorite. So these guys are, everybody keeps calling it a dreadnought because anything big and mechanical will get called a dreadnought. But to be fair, they're kind of dreadnoughty. So I'm not going to take it too serious. They're very tough to get out and very tough in combat. They've got +2 dice to melee. They've got nothing on range. They don't fuck with that. And their armor is -3. So they're super tough to deal with. They're armed with a Catherine wheel. This thing is crazy, right? Listen to this. It's a one-handed melee weapon that grants +1 bonus dice to hit. It's also got the keywords risky and heavy. Due to the enormous weight and the skill of the Anchorite in inflicting maximum pain, the Catherine wheel rolls on the injury table with 3d6 instead of 2, and you add all 3 together. You don't just take the highest dice. So you're adding all 3 together. Like, this thing hurts. And then in the other hand, it's got this thing called a Bonebreaker Mace. And they're getting +1 dice to injure on that too. Like, +1 bonus to injure. It's just, it's really annoying. Very scary in combat. Very tough to deal with. It's literally got tough. It's got fear, so it causes fear. Fear is one of, I think, the most powerful debuffs in the game, because it just makes it very awkward for your opponents to operate maximally. And that's really what Trench Crusade boils down to. It's interrupting each other's ability to do what you want to do as well as you possibly can. You're constantly messing with each other's likelihood of success, and saving blood markers is normally one of the ways that you would do that. You would stack them up, you would bank them, and Trench Pilgrims are just really good at getting blood markers off their back. So you have lots of units that can shred them individually, lots of units that can turn them into something else, and then you've got the War Prophet who can just like, oi, you don't need those blood markers, get rid of them. So yeah, very, very cool overall. They've currently got 2 variants, the Procession of Sacred Affliction and the Cavalcade of the 10th Plague. I think Procession of Sacred Affliction is really very good. They've got a rule that you can't wear capriots, which you don't really care about because lots of your units don't really give a shit, and the Communicants already have them kind of built in. It doesn't interfere with that, so who cares? You know, it counts as a capriot. It's not an actual capriot, unless somebody wants to lawyer me in the comments, in which case feel free, but that's the way I would play that. They can all buy Holy Icon Shields for 20 ducats. They've got an extra +1 dice to injury rolls when enemies are down, except Ecclesiastic Prisoners. They're just, I mean, you can't have machine guns. Oh no, I can't have machine guns. I've got murderous everything else. And then up to 3 Trench Pilgrims can get the Zealot Strength upgrade, so that's a lot of punt guns. And yeah, they're just like really good. You can use anti-tank hammers everywhere. Yeah, they're just like dope as hell, I find. So overall, Trench Pilgrims are fun to play because they're, I don't want to make anybody mad, but they have a very obvious purpose and a very obvious build path. You might want to do something like pick a shrine anchorite, pop it in the middle of the table, walk it towards the enemy so they have to freak out about it, and then have just the flanks collapse in and mesh them up. You can have a huge amount of fun with the martyrs coming back and being like super tough, giving you cheaper upgrade options. Ecclesiastic Prisoners can be hellish depending on the deployment rules of the game you're playing. Like some of the rules sometimes will be resulting in units being placed randomly on different sides of the board, and that can be incredibly fun to suddenly find that your guy with a martyrdom device is stood right beside the enemy commander. There's a lot of like fun to be had ultimately with Trench Pilgrims. For newer players, one of the concerns might be how difficult they'll be from a painting point of view, but I'm not perceiving a huge amount of exposed faces within this faction. And the reason I call that out specifically is that for new painters and even veteran painters, faces can be a problem. They can be a lot of work. They can be very annoying, eyeball placement and all that kind of shit. Whereas there's a lot of not faces in this. Now, not faces as in not having faces, but just covered faces like masks and stuff that make life much easier to paint. So yeah, all in all, I would say a really dope, fun, flavorful faction. The opportunities to do whatever you want to do and have whatever kind of flavor you want to have are very high for this faction. It leaves you wide open. New Antioch is very much going to be New Antioch and will always be flavored by the fact that it is a highly militarized group. So everybody's going to want to do their own, oh, you know, my guys in New Antioch are just like different to everybody else. But if you really want to do that and have the room to do it properly and the flavor to do it properly, then the Trench Pilgrims are actually the way to go. because they can be from anywhere. The voice of God can be heard. And last time I checked, folks, that's anywhere. And they can dress how they like. They can have United colors or their own colors. They can do whatever they want to do and just have a lot of fun with it. So yeah, that's the Trench Pilgrims. If you're planning on playing Trench Pilgrims, drop a comment to let us know why below. Pitch in. Do you think they're really good on the table? Do you just like the way they look? Do you like the flavor? Do you like the lore? Let us know why Trench Pilgrims are your faction. And hopefully I will get around to doing a lot more of these over the coming days. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for watching.